Hey everyone, my wife who cheated on me with her childhood friend to get a job where he was the boss. I never thought I'd be sharing my life on the internet like this, but I guess that's where we are now. I don't even know how to start this without sounding like some cliché, but here goes. My wife, Lauren, and I have been married for 7 years. We have 2 kids, a house that always seems to need fixing, and until recently, I thought we had a solid, if not perfect, life together. We argued sometimes about small stuff, money, the kids, who forgot to take the trash out, but who doesn't? I trusted her completely. Or at least I used to. Lauren has always been driven, the kind of woman who lights up a room when she walks in. She took a step back from her career after we had our youngest, deciding to be a stay-at-home mom for a few years. It was her choice, and while I admired her for it, I knew it wasn't easy. She missed having something of her own, something beyond just being mom. So, when she told me she wanted to get back into the workforce, I was fully on board. I mean, she's brilliant, degrees from great schools, years of experience in HR management, so I figured it wouldn't take her long to find a job. She started applying and interviewing, and honestly, I was just proud of her. When she landed an interview for a management position at a reputable company, I thought, this is it. This is her chance to get back in the game. That's when she told me her potential boss was someone she knew from high school. Jake Miller, she said casually one night as we were cleaning up after dinner. I don't know if you'd remember him. He was kind of a nerd back then, super into computers or something. I don't think we ever really talked much. She laughed when she said it, but there was something off about the way she avoided looking at me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, who remembers every classmate from high school? If anything, I felt a little sorry for the guy. Nerdy Jake probably got a lot of grief back in the day, and now he was interviewing someone who used to be the cool girl. Life has a way of flipping the script, doesn't it? The morning of the interview, Lauren was different. Usually, she'd roll out of bed, throw on something business casual, and call it a day. But that day, she was almost frantic. She tried on 3 different outfits, even asking for my opinion, which she never does. You look great in anything, I said, watching her swirl around the bedroom, muttering to herself about whether navy or black was too formal. She finally settled on a tailored navy dress that I hadn't seen her wear in years. Big day, I teased as she leaned into the mirror, applying makeup like she was heading to a gala instead of a job interview. You're acting like this is a first date. She smirked but didn't respond. A little weird, but I brushed it off. Interviews are nerve-wracking, right? She kissed me on the cheek, told me not to let the kids destroy the house while she was gone, and left. When she came back that evening, it was like a completely different person walked through the door. Lauren was practically glowing. She kicked off her heels, poured herself a glass of wine, and flopped onto the couch like someone who had just won the lottery. How'd it go? I asked, genuinely excited for her. It went so well, she said, her smile so wide it almost looked fake. Jake was surprisingly nice. He said he was impressed with my experience and thought I'd be a great fit. He even said he'd push the higher-ups to make a decision quickly. I smiled back, relieved. That's great, babe. I told you they'd love you. But as the days went on, little things started to bother me. For one, Lauren's phone was suddenly always with her. Before, she'd leave it on the counter or forget it in the car, but now it was glued to her hand, even when she was in the bathroom. When I asked about it, she just shrugged and said, the moms in the daycare group chat won't stop talking about Christmas plans. It's exhausting. Then there were the late-night texts. I'd hear her phone buzz while we were watching TV, and she'd glance at it with this small, secretive smile before setting it face down on the coffee table. I'm not the paranoid type, but something about the way she'd do it so casually made me uneasy. One night, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her phone buzz again. She got out of bed so quietly, I barely heard her leave the room. I stayed still, listening as she tiptoed down the hall and into the kitchen. My heart started racing. I told myself I was imagining things, that she was probably just texting one of her friends about something silly. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A week later, Lauren got the job. She was ecstatic, and I was happy for her, at least, I tried to be. We went out to celebrate at her favorite restaurant, where she ordered champagne and laughed like someone who didn't have a care in the world. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach, chalking it up to my imagination running wild. She was just excited about this new chapter in her life, right? But then came the night that changed everything. Lauren was in the shower, and her phone was on the kitchen counter, buzzing like crazy. I hesitated. I've never been the kind of guy to snoop, but something about the way she'd been acting made my stomach churn. My hand hovered over the phone, my mind racing. Finally, I gave in. I picked it up and swiped the screen to see a message from someone named Jake. My blood ran cold as I read the words. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for the next time. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I read the message again, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the words were still there, mocking me. This couldn't be happening. Not Lauren. Not my wife. The woman I trusted with everything. I put the phone down and sat there in the dark kitchen, my mind racing. Should I confront her? Pretend I didn't see it? My hands trembled as anger, confusion, and heartbreak collided in my chest. She came out of the bathroom a few minutes later, humming to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my head. I looked at her, really looked at her, and suddenly felt like I didn't know who she was anymore. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the message in my mind over and over again. What had I done to deserve this? And what was I going to do about it? After that night, I couldn't look at Lauren the same way. Every time she smiled at me or kissed me goodbye, all I could think about was that message. Last night was incredible. Can't wait for the next time. It replayed in my head like a broken record, each time twisting the knife a little deeper. I wanted answers, but I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more proof, more clarity, and most of all, time to process what the hell was happening. The first thing I did was start paying attention, like, really paying attention, to everything Lauren did. And once I started looking, the signs were everywhere. She'd gotten much more invested in her appearance since starting her new job. She'd spend longer in front of the mirror in the mornings, carefully curling her hair and applying makeup like she was heading to a photo shoot. Don't get me wrong, she's always taken care of herself, but this was different. She wasn't doing it for me. Then there were the late nights. Work's crazy right now, she'd say, or Jake's pushing us hard to meet deadlines. She'd come home hours after the kids were in bed, her face flushed, her energy oddly high for someone who supposedly just spent hours slogging through HR paperwork. I tried asking about her day, but her answers were vague, filled with phrases like, "Oh, just boring office stuff," or "nothing you'd want to hear about." The kicker was her phone. That thing might as well have been surgically attached to her hand. She never left it lying around anymore, not even when she went to the bathroom. Once, I caught her sneaking a glance at it during dinner, her lips curving into a tiny smile before she quickly locked the screen and tucked it into her lap. When I asked what was so funny, she shrugged and said, "Just a stupid meme from the daycare group chat." That might have worked a month ago, but now? I wasn't buying it. A week later, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed more than just a gut feeling or a single text message to confirm my worst fears. So, while Lauren was out, working late, again, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started digging. Her laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter, closed but not password protected. My hands were shaking as I opened it, half hoping I wouldn't find anything. But as I clicked through her emails, my stomach dropped. There it was, an email from Jake. "Hey, Lauren. Can't stop thinking about last night. Let's skip the formalities and just call it what it is. I want you. Let me know when you can slip away again. You looked incredible in that dress." My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I clicked back, scanning for more, and found a trail of emails going back weeks. They were careful, avoiding explicit details, but the subtext was clear. Late night meetings, lunch breaks that stretched for hours, and even one email where Jake suggested they take a business trip together to explore new opportunities. I felt sick. This wasn't just a fling. It was premeditated, calculated, a betrayal that cut deeper than I could have imagined. And the worst part? Lauren wasn't the woman I thought she was. The woman I loved would have laughed Jake off, told him to shove his job offer where the sun doesn't shine. But this Lauren? She played along. She wanted this. I couldn't sit on the evidence any longer. The anger building inside me felt like it was going to explode if I didn't do something. But I wasn't going to storm into a confrontation without a plan. I needed to be calm, strategic, and in control. So, I waited until the weekend, when the kids were at my parents' house, and Lauren couldn't hide behind her phone or her excuses. That Saturday evening, she came home from running errands, bags in hand, her face glowing like she just spent the day at a spa. I was waiting for her in the living room, my laptop open on the coffee table. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "Hey," she said cautiously, setting her bags down. "What's up? You look serious." "Sit down, Lauren," I said, my voice steady but cold. Her eyes flicked to the laptop, and for the briefest moment, I saw panic flash across her face. But she covered it quickly, plastering on that sweet, innocent smile I used to love. "What's this about?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the couch like a kid caught sneaking cookies before dinner. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I turned the laptop toward her and clicked on the first email. The screen lit up with Jake's words. "Can't stop thinking about last night." Her face went pale. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her lips parted, like she was trying to form a sentence but couldn't quite manage it. Finally, she looked at me. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think that's the question you should be asking, Lauren," I said, my tone as sharp as the knife she twisted in my back. "The real question is, how long have you been screwing your boss?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's not what you think," she stammered. "Oh, really?" I shot back, my voice rising. "So, Jake just accidentally sent you an email about how incredible last night was? Or is this part of some twisted corporate bonding exercise I don't know about?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't buying it. Not this time. "It's complicated," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for this to happen, I swear. It's just, I was feeling lost, and Jake, he made me feel seen." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Seen? Wasn't that what our marriage was supposed to be about? I thought back to all the times I stayed late at work, all the sacrifices I made to give our family a comfortable life. And this was the thanks I got. "You felt seen?" I spat, standing up and pacing the room. "Lauren, I've been here the whole damn time. But instead of talking to me, you decided to cheat with the guy you used to bully in high school. You're unbelievable." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but it didn't soften me. Her tears weren't for me, they were for herself. For getting caught. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lauren sat there, sobbing into her hands, as if tears could wash away what she'd done. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but the anger burning in my chest wouldn't let me. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to explain herself. Waiting for her to tell me something, anything, that would make this betrayal make sense. But she didn't say a word. She just cried. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Lauren, stop crying and talk to me," I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. "You owe me that much. Start with how long this has been going on." She wiped her face with trembling hands and looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "That's not an answer," I shot back. "How long?" She hesitated, her gaze darting to the floor. "A few months," she finally muttered, barely audible. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow even to my own ears. A few months. That's great, Lauren. Just great. So while I was at home with the kids, holding everything together, you were out playing house with your boss. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice rising defensively. It's not like I planned this, okay? It just happened. Don't give me that it just happened garbage, I snapped. You don't accidentally sleep with someone, Lauren. You make choices. You chose to text him, to meet him, to lie to me every single day. She flinched at my words, but I wasn't done. What about the job? Was it even real, or was that just a cover so you could? It was real, she interrupted, her voice desperate. Jake offered me the job because of my qualifications, not because of… She stopped, realizing mid-sentence how ridiculous she sounded. I shook my head in disbelief. You honestly expect me to believe that? He offered you a job because of your skills? Sure, Lauren. Let's go with that. And I'm supposed to ignore the fact that he's been drooling over you since high school and suddenly saw his chance to turn the tables. She stood up then, her posture defiant despite the tears still streaming down her face. You think this is all my fault? She shouted. Do you have any idea what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage? You're never around, always working, always tired. I needed someone to talk to, someone who actually paid attention to me. Her words hit like a sledgehammer. Part of me knew she wasn't entirely wrong. I had been distant at times, buried in work and the endless responsibilities of keeping a family afloat. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. Nothing could. So this is my fault? I said, my voice cold and low. You're blaming me because you couldn't bother to have a conversation before jumping into bed with Jake? I'm not blaming you, she shouted, her voice breaking. I'm just trying to make you understand how I felt. I didn't go looking for this, okay? It just happened. There it was again, it just happened. Like cheating was some freak accident, like tripping over a crack in the sidewalk. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I struggled to keep my emotions in check. I read the emails, Lauren. I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. This wasn't some one-time mistake. This was planned. Deliberate. You weren't just cheating on me, you were building a whole damn fantasy life with this guy. She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. And don't you dare pretend you were some helpless victim in all this. You knew exactly what you were doing when you put on that dress and walked into his office. You knew every time you lied to my face, every time you left me with the kids so you could sneak off with him. Lauren's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. You're right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew it was wrong, but I kept doing it anyway. And I hate myself for it. For the first time that night, her words sounded genuine. But it wasn't enough. Not after everything she'd put me through. I gave you everything, I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled rage. My trust, my loyalty, my love. And this is how you repay me? By stabbing me in the back with some guy you used to torment in high school. She winced at the mention of their past, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of shame in her eyes. It wasn't like that with Jake, she said quietly. He's not the same person he was back then. He's kind and he… Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you dare defend him. You think I care if he's kind? He knew you were married. He knew you had kids. And he didn't care. Just like you didn't care. Lauren sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands again. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I've ruined everything. For once, she wasn't wrong. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Lauren kept trying to apologize, to explain, but I couldn't hear her anymore. My head was pounding, my heart racing, and all I wanted was to get out of that room. Eventually, I told her I needed space and walked out, leaving her alone with her guilt. I ended up driving aimlessly for hours, my thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I married, the woman I thought I knew, turned into this stranger who could lie to me so easily? I didn't have answers, only questions that seemed to multiply with every passing mile. By the time I got home, Lauren was in bed. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching her as she lay curled up under the covers, her back to me. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, pity maybe? Sadness? But it was quickly drowned out by the memory of Jake's email, and the image of her smiling at her phone while I sat across from her like an idiot. I slept on the couch that night. And as I stared at the ceiling, the reality of my new life began to sink in. Nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the weight of everything hit me like a truck. I barely slept on the couch, and when I finally did, my dreams were plagued with images of Lauren and Jake, laughing, touching, lying. I woke up more exhausted than when I laid down, my chest heavy with anger, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Lauren was in the kitchen when I walked in, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She looked up at me, her face pale and drawn, her eyes swollen from crying. For a split second, I saw the woman I married, the one I used to share everything with, the one I thought I could always count on. But then the memory of that email crashed into me, and whatever sympathy I felt vanished. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice tentative. I ignored her and went straight for the coffee pot, the silence between us so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could feel her watching me, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement, but I wasn't ready to give her that. Not yet. "Are you going to say anything?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Or are you just going to keep punishing me with silence?" Her words made me laugh, but not in a funny way. It was that bitter, hollow laugh that escapes when you can't believe what you're hearing. I turned to face her, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "Punishing you?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Lauren, you slept with another man. You lied to me for months. You broke our family. And you think I'm the one punishing you?" She flinched, her hands gripping her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly. I don't know how to fix this if we can't even talk to each other." "Fix this?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Lauren, I don't even know if there's anything to fix. Do you understand that? You didn't just cheat on me, you made me question everything about our life. Our marriage. Hell, even myself. How do you fix that?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she looked down at her coffee, her shoulders slumping like she just realized the magnitude of what she'd done. "I want to try," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know I don't deserve it, but I love you, and I don't want to lose us." "Us?" I snapped. "Lauren, there is no us right now. You destroyed that the second you decided Jake was worth more than your husband and kids." Her head shot up at the mention of the kids, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't bring them into this," she said quickly. "They don't deserve to be hurt because of my mistakes." "No, they don't," I said, my voice cold. "But you should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with your boss." I could see the guilt written all over her face, but it didn't bring me any satisfaction. It just made the hole in my chest feel bigger. The rest of the weekend was unbearable. Lauren tried to act normal around the kids, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She was overly attentive, making pancakes for breakfast, playing board games in the living room, things she never usually did unless it was a holiday or someone's birthday. I, on the other hand, could barely hold it together. Every time I looked at her, I saw her with Jake. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered how many of those smiles she had given him. It was like living with a stranger who had the same face as the woman I used to love. By Sunday night, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Once the kids were in bed, I found Lauren in the living room, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. She looked up when I walked in, her expression wary. "We need to talk," I said, sitting down across from her. She nodded, setting her phone down on the coffee table. "Okay," she said softly. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I said bluntly. "How did this start? How long has it been going on? Why Jake?" And don't you dare lie to me, Lauren. I'll know. She hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. It started after the interview, she admitted, her voice shaking. He said he was impressed with me and wanted to take me out to celebrate getting the job. I didn't think anything of it at first, it just felt like a friendly gesture. And then what? I pressed. Her eyes filled with tears as she continued. We started texting. At first it was about work, but then it got personal. He'd compliment me, tell me how smart and beautiful I was. And I guess I liked the attention. It made me feel special. My stomach churned. Special? I repeated, my voice dripping with disgust. Lauren, you were married. You had a husband who loved you, kids who adored you. But that wasn't enough? You needed Jake to tell you how special you were? I know it sounds awful, she said, tears streaming down her face. But it wasn't just about the attention. He understood me in a way I felt like you didn't anymore. He listened to me. Her words cut deep, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. So you started sleeping with him? I said flatly. She nodded, her face crumpling. It only happened a few times, she said quickly. I swear, it wasn't an ongoing thing. And I stopped it before you found out. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, well, that makes it so much better, I said sarcastically. Thanks for doing me the favor of stopping after you completely destroyed my trust. She flinched, her tears falling harder. I don't know how to make this right, she whispered. I don't even know if I can. But I need you to know that I regret it. Every single day. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. Regret doesn't fix anything, Lauren, I said coldly. It doesn't change what you did. And it sure as hell doesn't make me forget the fact that you betrayed me. She looked up at me, her face a mask of anguish. What do you want me to do? She asked desperately. Tell me, and I'll do it. Anything. I stared at her for a long moment, my chest tight with a mix of rage and sadness. I want the truth, I said finally. All of it. And I want you to stop pretending like this is something we can just sweep under the rug. Her head dropped, and for the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. Okay, she whispered. I'll tell you everything. But as I looked at her, I couldn't help but wonder if knowing the full truth would make things better, or if it would just make the betrayal hurt even more. Lauren took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped her face. I'll tell you everything, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I stayed standing, my arms crossed, staring at her like I was a judge about to hand down a sentence. Part of me didn't want to hear it, didn't want to face just how deep her betrayal went. But the other part, the part that needed to understand, to make sense of the wreckage, forced me to stay. It started the night after the interview. She began, her voice shaking. When I told you Jake thought I was a great fit for the job, I wasn't lying. But what I didn't tell you was that he made me an offer. An offer? I asked, my stomach churning. What kind of offer? She winced, her eyes darting to the floor. He said he could guarantee me the position, but he wanted something in return. I froze, my mind racing to keep up. You mean he propositioned you? Like, he wanted to sleep with you for the job? Lauren nodded, tears streaming down her face. At first, I thought he was joking, she said, her voice cracking. I even laughed it off and told him I'd think about it, just to get him to drop it. But later that night, he texted me. He wasn't joking, Matt. He was serious. I stared at her, stunned. And instead of reporting him, you went along with it? Her head snapped up, her face filled with shame. I was scared, she cried. I hadn't worked in years, Matt. I felt useless, like I wasn't contributing to our family. And then Jake came along, offering me this incredible opportunity. I didn't know what to do. So you slept with him? I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't like that. She protested, her voice rising. I didn't say yes right away. I told him no at first, but he kept pushing. He said he wouldn't hire me unless I agreed. And I. She stopped, her words catching in her throat. You caved. I finished for her, the words like poison on my tongue. She nodded miserably. I hated myself for it. But I told myself it was a one-time thing, that I'd get the job and it would be over. I didn't think he'd keep asking. But he did, I said, piecing it together. And you kept saying yes. Lauren broke down again, her sobs echoing in the quiet room. I know I should have stopped, she whispered. But every time he'd ask, I'd feel like I owed him. Like I didn't deserve the job unless I kept him happy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife, the woman I trusted, the mother of my children, had traded her dignity, her loyalty, our marriage for a job. And the worst part? She let this man manipulate her into thinking she had no choice. Do you even hear yourself, Lauren? I said, my voice shaking with anger. You let this guy control you. You let him use you. And for what? A paycheck? A title? It wasn't just about the job, she said, her voice trembling. It was about how he made me feel. He made me feel wanted. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Wanted? I repeated, my voice rising. I've spent the last 7 years busting my ass to give you everything you've ever wanted. And you needed him to feel wanted? She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I don't expect you to understand, she sobbed. I don't even understand it myself. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, wondering how we had gotten to this point. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until Lauren finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. Her apology didn't soften the blow. If anything, it made the betrayal feel even sharper. Sorry doesn't cut it, Lauren, I said, my voice cold. You didn't just cheat on me. You lied to me, over and over again. You betrayed our family. And now you expect me to just, what? Forgive you? Pretend this never happened? She shook her head, her tears falling harder. I don't expect anything, she said. I don't want to lose you, Matt. I love you. I laughed bitterly. You've got a funny way of showing it. She flinched but didn't respond. The room fell silent again, the weight of her confession pressing down on both of us. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pack my bags and walk out the door, to leave her and Jake and all their lives behind. But the other part, the part that still loved her, despite everything, couldn't imagine a life without her. What happens now? She asked hesitantly, breaking the silence. I looked at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I don't know, I said honestly. But what I do know is that I need time. To think. To figure out if we, can even be saved. Her face crumpled at my words, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. That night, I slept on the couch again. But this time, it wasn't just to put distance between us. It was because the bed, the place where we'd shared so many intimate moments, felt like a crime scene. A place where trust had been murdered and love had been buried under the weight of lies. As I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, one thought kept running through my mind: how do you rebuild a life that's been shattered? And more importantly, do I even want to? The next few days passed in a fog. Lauren tried to act normal, as if we could somehow go back to the way things were. She'd pack the kids' lunches in the morning, ask me if I wanted coffee, and make small talk about the weather. But I couldn't bring myself to engage. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was Jake. Her lies. The betrayal. I kept my distance as much as possible, spending most of my time at work or holed up in the guest room we'd barely used before all this. Nights were the worst. The house felt suffocatingly quiet, except for the occasional sound of Lauren moving around in our bedroom. I'd stare at the ceiling for hours, replaying every moment of her confession, every sign I'd missed, every time she'd kissed me goodbye while sneaking around behind my back. One night, around 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my car keys and drove aimlessly through the empty streets of our town. The cool night air helped clear my head, but it didn't dull the ache in my chest. Eventually, I found myself parked at a 24-hour diner, staring at a plate of untouched pancakes and a mug of lukewarm coffee. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: peace, clarity, maybe even an answer to the question that had been gnawing at me since this whole nightmare began. Why? Why did Lauren do this? Why wasn't I enough? And why couldn't I just walk away? The truth was, part of me still loved her. And that was the cruelest irony of all. When I got home, the house was dark. I crept inside, expecting Lauren to be asleep, but instead I found her sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "I didn't know if you were coming back," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I needed some air," I replied, my tone flat. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I don't know how to fix this, Matt," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't even know if I can. But I'm trying. I need you to know that." I didn't respond. What could I say? That I appreciated her effort? That I was proud of her for finally owning up to the mess she created? The truth was, I didn't feel anything except exhaustion. "I'm going to bed," I said after a long pause, turning toward the guest room. "Wait," she said, her voice breaking. "Can we just talk? Please?" I hesitated, my hand on the doorframe. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to shut her out like she'd shut me out for months. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice. Or maybe it was the tiny, flickering hope that talking might make things hurt just a little bit less. "Fine," I said, sitting down in the armchair across from her. "Talk." She took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she began. "And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to imagine. But I need you to understand something. I love you, Matt. I always have. And I hate myself for what I did." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "You have a funny way of showing love," I said bitterly. Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect you to believe me," she said, her voice cracking. "But it's the truth. I made a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake. And if I could take it back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is try to be better, to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have done this," I said. "She wouldn't have lied to my face, betrayed me, and risked everything we built for some pathetic fling with her boss." "It wasn't a fling," she said quickly, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, it wasn't about. It was more complicated than that." I leaned forward, my jaw clenched. "Do you even hear yourself? You're still defending him. Still making excuses. How am I supposed to believe you're sorry when you can't even take full responsibility for what you did?" She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "You're right," she whispered. "You're absolutely right. I don't deserve your trust, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm begging you to give me a chance to make things right." I sat back, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know if I can do that, Lauren," I admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again." Her sobs grew louder, and for the first time in days, I felt a twinge of something, empathy, maybe? Or pity? It didn't matter. I couldn't let her tears cloud my judgment. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about our kids, our family, and whether or not this marriage could survive the weight of her betrayal. "I need time," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "Time to think. Time to figure out if this is even worth salvaging." She nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "Take all the time you need," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes." I stood up, suddenly feeling like the walls were closing in on me. "Good night, Lauren," I said, heading for the guest room. Good night, she replied, her voice trembling. As I closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd just set us on the path to healing, or if I was prolonging the inevitable end of our marriage. The next morning, I woke up to the faint sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. For a brief moment, it felt like nothing had changed, like we were just another normal family going through the motions of a Saturday morning. But then reality came crashing back. Lauren had betrayed me. The laughter wasn't a sign of normalcy. It was her trying to hold things together for the kids. I stayed in the guest room for a while, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should even join them. Part of me wanted to avoid her entirely, but I knew that wasn't fair to the kids. Whatever was happening between Lauren and me, they didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Lauren froze mid-sentence. She was making pancakes with the kids, her hair tied back in a messy bun, flour smudged on her cheek. For a second, she looked like the woman I married, the woman I'd built a life with. But then our eyes met, and the tension between us was palpable. "Morning, Dad!" my youngest shouted, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Morning, buddy," I said, forcing a smile as I ruffled his hair. Lauren didn't say anything, but I caught her watching me out of the corner of her eye. She was trying to gauge where I stood, whether I was still furious or if there was a sliver of hope for us. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an answer. Instead, I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat at the table, focusing all my attention on the kids. The rest of the morning passed uneventfully, but the weight of unspoken words hung in the air. Once the kids were distracted with a movie, Lauren cornered me in the hallway. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, already exhausted by the idea of another emotionally charged conversation. "What do you want, Lauren?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. I want to know where your head is at. You said you needed time, and I'm trying to give you that, but... But what? I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. You want me to magically tell you everything's okay? That I forgive you? It doesn't work like that. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I know. She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. I want to do whatever it takes to fix this, Matt. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just tell me what you need. I stared at her, trying to decipher whether she was genuinely remorseful or just desperate to keep our family intact. Fine, I said after a long pause. We'll try counseling. But don't think for a second that this means I've forgiven you. I'm doing this for the kids, not for you. Her eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope, but I wasn't ready to meet her halfway. Not yet. The following week, we had our first counseling session. Sitting in that small, stuffy office with Lauren felt surreal, like we were actors in a play we didn't want to be in. The therapist, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Peterson, started by asking us to share why we were there. Lauren spoke first, her voice shaky but determined. I made a terrible mistake, she admitted. I betrayed my husband's trust, and I don't know if I can ever fix what I broke. But I want to try. Dr. Peterson nodded, her expression neutral as she turned to me. And you, Matt? How are you feeling about being here? Honestly? I said, my voice tight. I don't even know if this is worth it. She lied to me. She cheated. And now I'm supposed to sit here and pretend like talking about our feelings is going to fix everything? Lauren flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to spare her feelings. I was here because I owed it to my kids to at least try. Dr. Peterson held up a hand, her calm demeanor surprisingly disarming. No one's pretending anything, Matt, she said. This process is about honesty, even if it's painful. It's clear you're still very hurt, and that's okay. Healing takes time. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. Healing felt like a pipe dream when the wound was still so fresh. Over the next few sessions, we peeled back the layers of our relationship, how we'd drifted apart, how Lauren had felt neglected, how I'd thrown myself into work to avoid dealing with the growing distance between us. It was uncomfortable and messy, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were actually addressing the root of the problem. Lauren surprised me, too. She didn't deflect or make excuses. She owned up to everything, even when it was hard to hear. I let myself believe that Jake's attention filled some void in my life. She admitted during one session. But the truth is, that void was my own creation. I pushed Matt away instead of working through the things I was struggling with. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Her words stung, but they also felt real. For the first time, I wondered if there might be a chance for us to rebuild. But just as I started to let my guard down, life threw another curveball. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Frowning, I opened it, and immediately felt my blood run cold. Matt, you deserve to know the full truth about Jake and Lauren. Meet me tomorrow at noon. Cafe West. It's important. The message wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name to know who it was. Jake. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. What else could there possibly be? What more could I learn about Lauren's betrayal that I didn't already know? For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity, or maybe some sick sense of masochism, got the better of me. The next day, I found myself sitting in the corner booth of Cafe West, nursing a black coffee and waiting for the man who had turned my life upside down. Jake walked in a few minutes later, his confident smirk immediately setting my teeth on edge. He spotted me, waved like we were old friends, and sauntered over to my table. You've got some nerve showing your face, I said, my voice cold. I'm not here to fight, Jake said, holding up his hands. I'm here to set the record straight. And with that, he sat down and began unraveling a version of events that made my stomach churn. Jake sat across from me, looking annoyingly relaxed for someone who had systematically destroyed my life. He leaned back in his chair, his arms resting casually on the edge of the table as if we were catching up over beers instead of hashing out the aftermath of his affair with my wife. I'm surprised you came, he said, flashing me a smug smile. Cut the crap, I snapped, my voice low but sharp. You said you had something to tell me, so talk. Otherwise, we're done here. He raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying my anger, but eventually his smirk faded. Fair enough, he said, leaning forward. Look, I know I screwed up. I crossed a line I shouldn't have. But you deserve to know the full story. I folded my arms across my chest, my eyes narrowing. I already know the story, I said. You pressured my wife into sleeping with you in exchange for a job. That about cover it? Jake flinched, his smug demeanor cracking slightly. That's not exactly how it went, he said, his voice quieter now. Yes, I made the first move. And yes, I crossed professional boundaries. But Lauren wasn't. She wasn't an unwilling participant, Matt. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my temper in check. What are you trying to say? I'm saying that Lauren didn't just go along with it because of the job, he said, his tone firm. She came to me. After that first time, she started reaching out. Texting me late at night. Asking to meet up, even when it wasn't about work. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to stay calm. And I'm supposed to believe you? The guy who had no problem sleeping with another man's wife? Jake shrugged. I get it. You hate me, and you probably think I'm lying to save my own skin. But I'm telling you the truth. Whatever problems you and Lauren had in your marriage, they didn't start with me. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Why are you telling me this? I asked through gritted teeth. What do you get out of it? I don't get anything, he said, his voice suddenly serious. In fact, I'll probably lose a lot by being here. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you the truth. I'm not trying to ruin your life, Matt. I just think you deserve to know that whatever happened between Lauren and me, it wasn't one-sided. I sat back, staring at him in disbelief. Part of me wanted to lunge across the table and wipe that self-righteous look off his face. But another part of me, the part that had been replaying Lauren's confession over and over in my head, couldn't ignore what he was saying. Had Lauren been more involved in this than she let on? Was her story about feeling pressure just a convenient excuse to deflect some of the blame? I didn't know what to believe anymore. When I got home, Lauren was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She glanced up when I walked in, her face lighting up for a brief moment before she noticed the expression on mine. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting the knife down. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I set my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, watching her carefully. "I met Jake today," I said finally. Her face went pale. "What? Why?" "He reached out," I said, my voice even. "Said he wanted to tell me his side of the story." Lauren froze, her eyes darting to the floor. "And what did he say?" "That you weren't as innocent in all of this as you want me to believe," I said bluntly. "That you were the one who kept it going. That you reached out to him after that first time." She opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the counter. "It's not that simple," she whispered. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you lied to me." Again. Lauren looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't lie to you," she said, her voice breaking. "I told you the truth about how it started. But yes, I did reach out to him afterward." I was confused, Matt. I felt trapped, and I didn't know how to fix what I'd done. "Talking to him, it was easier than facing you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Easier?" I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. "You were confused, so instead of coming to your husband, the man you supposedly love, you ran to the guy you cheated with." "I know it was wrong," she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. "I know I messed up, Matt. But I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, and I thought if I could just figure out how I felt." "Figure out how you felt?" I interrupted, laughing bitterly. "What does that even mean, Lauren? Were you trying to decide between him and me? Is that it?" She shook her head frantically. "No. It wasn't like that. I never wanted to be with Jake. I was trying to make sense of everything, but I didn't know how to talk to you about it. And by the time I realized how far gone I was, it was too late." I stared at her, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You had a choice, Lauren," I said coldly. "And you chose him. Over and over again." She broke down, sinking to the floor and covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Matt. I don't know how to make this right." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because in that moment I realized something that terrified me more than anything. I didn't know if I wanted her to make it right. Lauren stayed on the kitchen floor, sobbing into her hands while I stood there, frozen. Part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her it was okay, even though I knew it wasn't. The other part, the louder, angrier part, wanted to walk out the door and never look back. I couldn't reconcile the two. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my kids, the person who was supposed to have my back no matter what. And yet, here she was, crumpled on the floor, confessing that she had chosen Jake over me. Not just once, but repeatedly. "I don't know what to say to you anymore, Lauren," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. "Every time I think we've hit rock bottom, you find a way to dig deeper." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "I never meant for it to get this bad," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to lose you. You didn't want to lose me," I repeated, shaking my head. "But you didn't stop yourself from doing the one thing that would guarantee you'd lose me. Do you even hear yourself?" "I was scared," she said again, her voice trembling. "And I was selfish. I know that. I didn't know how to deal with everything I was feeling. I felt like I was drowning, Matt. And Jake, he made me feel like I could breathe again." Her words stabbed at me, cutting deeper than I thought possible. "And what about me?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Do you think I've never felt like I was drowning? Do you think I don't feel suffocated by the weight of keeping this family together? But I didn't run to someone else. I didn't betray you." Her sobs grew louder, but I wasn't finished. You had a choice, Lauren. You could have come to me. You could have told me how you were feeling, and we could have worked through it together. But instead you went to him. Over and over again. And now you expect me to just, what? Pretend like that's something I can forgive? She didn't respond. She just sat there, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with the force of her cries. For the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt numb. That night, I found myself lying awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the faint hum of the refrigerator. But my mind was anything but quiet. Jake's words kept echoing in my head. Whatever problems you and Lauren had in your marriage, they didn't start with me. I hated to admit it, but he wasn't entirely wrong. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We both made mistakes, let resentment build up in the small cracks of everyday life. But the difference was, I never let those cracks break us. Lauren did. I thought about the kids, how they adored their mom, how they looked at her like she hung the moon. What would happen if I left? How would it affect them? Would they blame me for breaking up the family, or would they understand? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I needed answers, but the only person who could give them to me was Lauren. And right now, I didn't know if I could trust a single word that came out of her mouth. The next morning, Lauren was in the kitchen again, her eyes red and puffy, but she tried to act normal. She smiled weakly when I walked in, but I didn't return it. I couldn't. Not yet. I made coffee, she said softly, pushing a steaming mug toward me. Thanks, I muttered, taking the cup but not meeting her eyes. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the tension between us almost unbearable. Finally, she broke it. I know I've lost your trust, she said, her voice trembling. And I know it's going to take a long time, if it's even possible, to earn it back. But I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I looked at her, my jaw tightening. You keep saying that, I said. But do you even know what that means? Do you understand how much damage you've done? She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. I do, she said quietly. And I know I can't undo it. But I can try to be better. For you. For the kids. For our family. Our family, I repeated bitterly. You mean the one you risked for a fling with your boss? The one you destroyed because you couldn't be bothered to talk to me before running to him? Her tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. Yes, she said. That family. The one I still want to fight for, even if it's too late. I stared at her for a long moment, my chest tight with a mix of anger and something I couldn't quite name. Hope? Doubt? I wasn't sure. I need space, I said finally. Real space. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. Okay, she whispered. If that's what you need. It is, I said firmly. And if you're serious about fighting for this family, you'll use the time to figure out how to make it right. Not just for me, but for the kids. Because if you're not ready to do the work, Lauren, I'm done. She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes, she said softly. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, grabbing my overnight bag from the guest room. As I stepped out the door, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of the end, or the start of something new. Driving to my brother's house felt like both a relief and a failure. Relief because I finally had some distance from Lauren and the suffocating tension of our broken home. Failure because leaving felt like admitting defeat, like I wasn't strong enough to face the mess head-on. But I knew I needed this. If I stayed, the anger and confusion would eat me alive. My brother, Ryan, greeted me at the door with his usual easygoing demeanor. He took one look at the overnight bag in my hand and the exhaustion etched on my face and didn't ask questions. Guest room's all yours, he said, stepping aside to let me in. Beer's in the fridge, and I'm ordering pizza later. You good with pepperoni? Yeah, thanks, I muttered, setting my bag down by the couch. Ryan didn't push for details, but I could tell he wanted to. He'd always been the kind of guy who could read a room, and he must have sensed I wasn't ready to talk yet. We spent the evening watching a game, barely speaking except to curse at the ref or cheer for a good play. It was exactly what I needed, silence without being alone. Eventually, after Ryan went to bed, I found myself scrolling through my phone, staring at old photos of Lauren and me. There we were on our wedding day, grinning like idiots, oblivious to the challenges ahead. Another photo showed her holding our youngest in the hospital, her face glowing with pride and exhaustion. Then one from our anniversary last year, where she wore that same navy dress Jake had mentioned in his email. My stomach twisted. How long had I been blind? The next morning, Ryan and I sat on the porch with coffee, the crisp morning air cutting through the silence. You want to tell me what's going on? He asked finally, his tone careful. I sighed, staring into my mug like it held the answers I couldn't find. Lauren cheated on me, I said bluntly. Ryan's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. Damn, he said softly. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. Yeah, I muttered, setting the mug down. It's not just the cheating, though. It's the lies. The way she made me feel like I was the one failing her when she was the one running to someone else. Ryan nodded, letting me vent without interrupting. She told me it started because she felt neglected, I continued. But that doesn't excuse what she did. And the worst part? She let it go on for months. She kept going back to him. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Do you think she's sorry? I snorted. She says she is. She's crying, begging me to give her another chance. But how am I supposed to trust anything she says now? Ryan was quiet for a moment before he spoke. Trust's a tough thing to rebuild, he said carefully. But it's not impossible. The question is, do you want to try? Or are you just done? I didn't know how to answer that. Over the next few days, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the chaos of my personal life. Lauren called and texted a few times, but I mostly ignored her. She left voicemails, her voice breaking as she begged me to come home, to talk, to let her prove that she could fix this. One night, after another long day, I finally listened to one of her messages. Matt, I know I don't deserve another chance, she said, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But I need you to know that I'm not giving up on us. I've been looking into individual counseling, trying to figure out why I made the choices I did. I don't expect you to come home yet, but I hope you will. For the kids, if nothing else. Her words stayed with me as I lay in bed that night. Counseling? She hadn't mentioned that before. Maybe she really was trying to change. But was it enough? The following weekend, I went back to the house to see the kids. I'd called ahead to let Lauren know, and she promised to give me space while I was there. Walking into the house felt strange. It was still home, but it wasn't. Lauren had tidied up, but there was a hollowness to the place, like the life had been sucked out of it. The kids were thrilled to see me, clinging to my legs and babbling about everything I'd missed. For a few hours, I forgot about the mess Lauren and I had created. We played board games, built Lego towers, and even made cookies that turned out more like burned hockey pucks. It was the happiest I'd felt in weeks. But Lauren was never far from my mind. She stayed out of the way, true to her word, but I could feel her presence like a shadow in the house. At one point I caught her watching me from the kitchen doorway, her face a mix of hope and heartbreak. I didn't say anything, and she disappeared before I could decide if I wanted to. When it was time to leave, the kids begged me to stay. I'll see you soon, I promised, hugging them tightly. Lauren walked me to the door, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. I'll call to set up another time with the kids, I said, avoiding her gaze. Okay, she whispered. As I drove away, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me again. The kids needed stability, but I didn't know if I could provide that while staying married to Lauren. And then there was the nagging question I still couldn't shake. Was I staying because I loved her, or because I was too scared to let go? After leaving the house, I found myself parked in a quiet lot by the lake. It was a place Lauren and I used to go when we first started dating, back when life felt simple and love felt unbreakable. Sitting there now, staring at the rippling water, I felt a sharp pang of nostalgia. How had it all fallen apart so completely? I tried to imagine what life would look like if I stayed, if I forgave Lauren and we tried to rebuild. Could I ever look at her without seeing Jake? Could I ever sleep next to her without wondering if she was thinking about him? And then there was the alternative, walking away. Starting over. But that thought wasn't any easier. The kids would be devastated. The house we'd built together would become just another item to divide. And even though Lauren had shattered my trust, the thought of a life without her still felt hollow. I sat there for hours, going in circles, until the sun dipped below the horizon and the cold seeped into the car. For all my thinking, I was no closer to an answer than when I'd started. The next day, I got a call from Dr. Peterson, the therapist we'd been seeing together. "Lauren mentioned you've taken some space," she said, her tone professional but warm. "I wanted to check in and see how you're feeling about everything." I hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know if this is something I want to keep trying for. But the kids, they're a big factor, of course," she said gently. "But I want you to focus on what you need, Matt. Have you had time to process your emotions without worrying about what Lauren or the kids need from you?" I thought about it. Between work, the kids, and the constant weight of Lauren's betrayal, I hadn't really taken the time to sit with my feelings. I'd been too busy trying to manage the fallout. "No, not really," I admitted. "Then I'd encourage you to do that," she said. "It's okay to feel angry, hurt, confused. And it's okay to take the time you need to figure out what's best for you." After we hung up, I decided to take her advice. I spent the rest of the day alone, away from my phone, just letting myself feel everything I'd been suppressing. The anger, the sadness, the bitterness, it all came rushing to the surface, raw and overwhelming. By the end of the day, I felt drained but lighter, like I'd taken a step closer to understanding what I needed. Later that week, Lauren called. It was the first time we'd spoken directly since I left. "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "I was wondering if we could meet. Just to talk. No pressure." I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face her again, to reopen the wound that had barely started to scab over. But a part of me was curious. She'd mentioned in her voicemail that she'd started individual counseling. Maybe she'd actually learned something. "Fine," I said finally. "Tomorrow. Cafe West." The irony of meeting at the same place where I'd confronted Jake wasn't lost on me, but it felt like neutral ground, a place where we could talk without the weight of home looming over us. When I walked into the cafe the next day, Lauren was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked up when I approached, her expression a mix of hope and nervousness. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as I sat down. "What do you want, Lauren?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. She flinched but didn't look away. "I wanted to tell you about counseling," she said. "I've been going twice a week since you left. And it's been hard, Matt. Really hard. But it's helping me understand why I did what I did." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "And what have you figured out?" She took a deep breath. "I let my insecurities get the best of me," she said. "I felt like I wasn't enough for you, enough for myself. And instead of dealing with those feelings, I looked for validation in the worst possible place." I didn't respond, letting her continue. "I know that doesn't excuse what I did," she said quickly. "Nothing does. But I want you to know that I'm not blaming you anymore. This was my failure, not yours. And I'm working on making sure it never happens again, no matter what happens between us." Her words sounded sincere, but I couldn't shake the lingering doubt. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you suddenly willing to take responsibility when you spent months lying to my face?" "Because I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling. But more than that, I don't want to keep being the kind of person who lets fear and selfishness control her. I want to be better, for myself, for the kids, and for you, if you'll let me. Her honesty caught me off guard. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the woman I fell in love with, the one who wasn't perfect, but was always willing to fight for what mattered. But was it too late? I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she said softly. But I'm not giving up on us, Matt. Not yet. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything we'd lost hanging heavy between us. For the first time, though, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something new. Whether that was reconciliation or goodbye, I still didn't know. The conversation at the cafe stayed with me long after I left. Lauren's words echoed in my head, blending with my own thoughts and doubts. She seemed genuine, more genuine than I'd seen her in months. But how do you separate sincerity from desperation when trust has been shattered? For the next few days, I kept my distance, letting her message simmer. I didn't want to make any impulsive decisions. I threw myself into work and focused on the kids during my visits. Each time I saw them, I was reminded of what was at stake, not just my relationship with Lauren, but the future of our family. That weekend, my brother Ryan sat me down. You're not staying here forever, he said bluntly, leaning against the counter while I nursed a beer. You've got to make a choice. Either work things out with Lauren or start figuring out what life looks like without her. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. It's not that simple, Ryan. It is, he said, crossing his arms. You're dragging this out because you're scared. And I get it. But sitting in limbo isn't helping anyone, especially you. He wasn't wrong. As much as I hated to admit it, I was stuck in a cycle of indecision, paralyzed by fear of making the wrong move. What if I can't get over it? I asked quietly. What if I forgive her, but it always hangs over me? Ryan shrugged. Then you know you tried. But at least you'll have made a choice. That's better than sitting here, driving yourself crazy over what-ifs. I thought about his words long after he'd gone to bed. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to stop running and start figuring out what I wanted, what I needed, to move forward. The next morning, I called Lauren. Can we meet? I asked, my voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside me. There was a pause on the other end before she answered. Of course, she said softly. When? Tomorrow, I said. Same place. She agreed, and we hung up. When I walked into the cafe the next day, Lauren was already waiting. She looked nervous, twisting her wedding ring around her finger like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Hi, she said when I sat down. Hi. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before I spoke. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I said, my voice calm but firm. About us, about the kids, about everything that's happened. Lauren nodded, her eyes brimming with hope and fear. I'm not going to pretend that this is something we can just fix overnight, I continued. What you did, it broke me, Lauren. It broke our marriage. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to put those pieces back together. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she stayed silent, waiting for me to finish. But, I said, my voice softening, I'm willing to try. Not for the sake of what we used to have, but for the sake of what we might be able to rebuild. Her hand flew to her mouth as a sob escaped her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Thank you, Matt. I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll never stop fighting for us. I'm not making any promises, I warned. This isn't forgiveness. It's a chance, a very small chance, to see if we can find our way back to each other. But it's going to take time. And a lot of work. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I'll do anything. Good, I said, leaning back in my chair. Because I'm not putting in all this effort just to end up back where we started. If we're doing this, we're doing it the right way. Over the next few weeks, we began the slow and painful process of rebuilding. We continued counseling, both individually and as a couple. Dr. Peterson didn't let either of us off the hook, forcing us to confront the ugly truths about our relationship and ourselves. There were moments when I thought about walking away. The pain of Lauren's betrayal still lingered, and some days, it felt too heavy to bear. But then there were moments of clarity, moments where I saw glimpses of the woman I fell in love with, the woman who was fighting to make amends. Lauren kept her word. She was transparent about everything, from her schedule to her emotions. She went above and beyond to rebuild the trust she'd broken, even when it meant facing uncomfortable truths about herself. And slowly, against all odds, I started to believe in her again. One night, after the kids were asleep, we sat on the porch together, the cool night air wrapping around us. "I know I've said this before," Lauren began, her voice quiet. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. For everything. For breaking your trust, for hurting you, for risking everything we built. I don't expect you to ever forget what I did. But I hope you'll let me show you that I'm not that person anymore." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked out at the stars, the weight of her words settling over me. "I don't know if I'll ever forget," I said finally. "But I want to believe we can move forward. I want to believe that we're worth fighting for." Lauren reached for my hand, her touch tentative, like she was afraid I'd pull away. But I didn't. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of hope, small and fragile, but real. We weren't healed. We weren't fixed. But maybe, just maybe, we were on our way. The days after our conversation on the porch were cautiously optimistic. Lauren and I continued counseling and started implementing some of the strategies Dr. Peterson suggested. Honest communication became the cornerstone of our rebuilding process. For the first time in years, we were having real conversations, not just about the affair but about everything. Some days, it felt like progress. Other days, it felt like we were trying to climb a mountain with no clear summit. One night, I came home late from work to find Lauren sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a photo album. It was one of those albums we'd put together in the early years of our marriage, back when life seemed simpler. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of nostalgia and sadness. "Do you remember this day?" she asked, pointing to a picture of us at the beach, laughing as the waves crashed around us. I nodded, sitting down across from her. "Yeah. You were mad because I accidentally dropped your phone in the water." She smiled faintly. "And you spent the rest of the day trying to make it up to me." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us lost in the memory. "I miss us," she said quietly. "So do I," I admitted. It was the truth. I missed the ease we used to have, the way we could laugh and argue and make up without the weight of betrayal hanging over us. But I also knew that us no longer existed. What we were trying to build now was something new, something different. Whether it would be stronger or more fragile, only time would tell. Despite the small moments of connection, the trust issues lingered like a shadow over everything we did. One evening, Lauren's phone buzzed while we were watching TV. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and quickly set it back down, face down. My stomach twisted. The gesture was innocent enough, but it brought back a flood of memories I'd been trying to bury. "Who was that?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She looked at me, startled. "It was just a notification from the daycare app," she said carefully. "You sure about that?" Her face fell, and I immediately felt guilty for snapping at her. "Matt, I'm not hiding anything," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I promise you I'd be honest, and I meant it." I nodded, forcing myself to take a deep breath. "I know," I said. "It's just hard sometimes." "I get it," she said, reaching for my hand. "And I'll do whatever it takes to help you feel secure again. But I need you to tell me when you're feeling this way. Don't let it fester." Her response surprised me. The old Lauren might have gotten defensive or brushed me off, but this Lauren, the one who was trying to rebuild our marriage, met my insecurities with patience and understanding. It didn't erase the doubts completely, but it helped. A few weeks later, Lauren suggested we take a weekend trip as a family. Just the four of us, she said. We could use a change of scenery. The kids would love it. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready to spend an entire weekend in such close quarters with her. But the kids were thrilled at the idea, and I couldn't bring myself to say no. We rented a small cabin near a lake, and for the first time in months, things felt normal. We went hiking, roasted marshmallows, and played board games by the fireplace. The kids were happy, and for a little while, I let myself believe that maybe we could find our way back to happiness. But on the last night of the trip, as we were sitting on the deck watching the stars, Lauren brought up something I wasn't prepared for. "Have you thought about whether you can forgive me?" she asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the sky. The question caught me off guard. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Some days I feel like I can. Other days I'm not so sure." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I understand," she said softly. I hope you'll keep trying. Because I will. For as long as it takes." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "I am trying," I said finally. And I was. But trying didn't mean the pain had gone away. It didn't mean I wasn't haunted by the images of her and Jake, by the lies she told and the trust she'd broken. Trying meant I wasn't giving up. When we returned home, I found myself reflecting on the trip more than I expected. It hadn't been perfect, but it had reminded me of why I fell in love with Lauren in the first place. Beneath the pain and the betrayal, there was still a connection, still something worth fighting for. But I also knew that rebuilding wasn't just about love. It was about trust, and trust was something that couldn't be rushed. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel the faintest flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me moving forward, one step at a time. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly began to feel more manageable. Lauren and I had fallen into a tentative rhythm, counseling sessions, family time, and long, raw conversations that often left us emotionally drained but marginally closer. The kids were happier too, their routines settling back into something resembling normalcy. But trust? That was still the elephant in the room. No matter how many good days we had, there was always a lingering doubt at the back of my mind. And while Lauren was patient and open about her every move, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that I didn't know everything. One evening, I decided I needed closure. Jake was still a presence in my thoughts, an unresolved thread in this tangled mess. Part of me hated the idea of speaking to him again, but another part knew I wouldn't be able to move forward until I understood his role in all of this. So, against my better judgment, I called him. To my surprise, he picked up after just a few rings. "Matt," he said cautiously. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "I didn't think I'd be calling," I admitted. "But I need answers. Can we meet?" There was a pause before he sighed. "Fine. Same place as last time?" "Yeah." When I walked into the cafe, Jake was already there, sitting in the same booth where we'd had our first confrontation. He looked less smug this time, almost weary. "You've got guts, showing up here again," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I could say the same to you," he replied, folding his arms on the table. "What do you want, Matt?" "Honesty," I said bluntly. "I need to know the full truth about you and Lauren. No games, no dodging. Just the facts." He nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. "Fair enough. Asked your questions? Did you ever love her?" I asked, the words bitter on my tongue. Jake's eyebrows shot up, and he leaned back in his seat. "Love her? No. I mean, I liked her, sure. She's smart, funny, and, let's be honest, beautiful. But love? No. What happened between us wasn't about that." "Then what was it about?" He hesitated, as if weighing how much to say. "It started as an ego thing, I guess," he admitted. "I've had a chip on my shoulder since high school. Lauren was out of my league back then, and I knew it. When she walked into my office after all those years, looking for a job, I saw an opportunity. To do what? I asked, my voice sharp. To prove to myself that I could have her, he said quietly. It sounds awful, I know. But that's the truth. At first, it was just flirting. Testing the waters. But when she didn't shut it down, I pushed further. And eventually, well, you know the rest. I clenched my fists under the table, my jaw tightening. So, this was just some twisted game for you? Not entirely, Jake said, his expression serious. It stopped being about ego after a while. I actually cared about her feelings, her struggles. But I never wanted to break up your marriage. I didn't expect it to go as far as it did. Bullshit, I snapped. You knew she was married, and you pursued her anyway. Don't act like you're some victim of circumstance. Jake raised his hands defensively. I'm not saying I'm innocent, Matt. I made my choices, and they were selfish. But I'm not the only one who made choices. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Do you regret it? I asked after a long pause. Every damn day, he said quietly. Not just because of what it did to you, but because of what it brought out in me. I became someone I don't want to be. For the first time, I saw something in Jake that I hadn't expected, remorse. Whether it was genuine or just another performance, I wasn't sure. But it gave me the tiniest sense of closure. I hope it was worth it, I said coldly, standing up. It wasn't, Jake said simply. I walked out without another word, leaving him alone in that booth. When I got home, Lauren was waiting for me. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting as she stood in the living room. Where were you? She asked softly. I went to see Jake, I said, dropping my keys on the counter. Her eyes widened. Why? Because I needed to hear his side of things, I said. I needed to understand what the hell happened between the two of you. And? She asked, her voice trembling. And he told me the truth, I said, my tone firm. At least, his version of it. Lauren sat down on the couch, her shoulders slumping. What did he say? That it started as an ego thing for him, I said. That he wanted to prove he could have you. But he also said he cared about you, that it wasn't just about the power or the thrill. She winced, tears pooling in her eyes. I didn't care about him like that, she whispered. I let him manipulate me, and I convinced myself I was in control. But I never stopped loving you, Matt. Never. I sighed, sitting down across from her. I don't care about Jake anymore, I said. This isn't about him. It's about us. And whether or not we can survive what you did. Her tears spilled over, and she nodded. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, she said. We'll see, I said quietly. But for now, I think we need to keep taking things one day at a time. It wasn't the resolution either of us wanted, but it was the only one I could offer. Trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. And love couldn't erase the scars. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to keep going. The days following my conversation with Jake felt like a strange limbo. On one hand, I felt lighter, as if confronting him had finally closed a chapter I'd been unable to move past. On the other hand, the reality of rebuilding my marriage with Lauren remained as daunting as ever. Lauren sensed the shift, though. She didn't press me for details about my meeting with Jake, but she did step up in ways that were hard to ignore. She was more patient, more present, and more transparent. It wasn't just words anymore, it was actions. One evening, she approached me as I was working on the laptop in the living room. Can I sit with you? She asked hesitantly. I glanced up, nodding. Sure. She sat on the edge of the couch, her posture tentative, like she was afraid of overstepping. There's something I want to show you, she said, handing me her phone. What's this? It's everything, she said softly. I've kept track of my counseling notes, the progress I've made, and a letter I wrote to you. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you yet, but I think it's time. I stared at the phone for a moment before scrolling through. The first thing I saw was a bulleted list of goals she'd set for herself in therapy. Learn to address feelings without avoidance. Rebuild trust with Matt through actions, not promises. Be the partner and mother I want to be. The next item was the letter. My hand shook as I opened it. Dear Matt, if you're reading this, it means I've found the courage to let you see the mess inside my heart. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm trying. Not just for you, but for me. Because I hate the person I became, the person who hurt the man she loves most in the world. I don't know if words mean much to you right now, but I need you to hear this. You are enough. You have always been enough. My choices had nothing to do with you and everything to do with my own failures. I let my insecurities and selfishness take over, and in doing so, I risked losing the best thing that ever happened to me. You didn't deserve this. None of it. And I know I can never undo what I've done. But I can promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right, whether we're together or not. Because you deserve love, loyalty, and respect, and I intend to give you all three, every day, in every way I can. Thank you for giving me even the smallest chance to show you that I can be better. Thank you for not walking away, even when you had every reason to. I love you, Matt. I always will. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. I set the phone down, staring at Lauren as she twisted her hands in her lap, waiting for my reaction. Did your counselor suggest you write this? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. She nodded. She thought it might help me process everything. And maybe help you understand how I feel. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It's a good letter, I said finally. And I appreciate it. But rebuilding this, it's not just about how you feel. It's about whether or not I can move past what you did. I know, she said quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness right now. Just the chance to keep trying. Her honesty disarmed me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could see the woman I'd married, the one who was flawed but willing to fight for what mattered. Okay, I said after a long pause. Then let's keep trying. The following weeks were a mix of progress and setbacks. Counseling sessions grew more intense, as Dr. Peterson pushed us to confront the deeper issues that had led to Lauren's infidelity and my emotional distance. There were moments when I wanted to walk out, moments when the pain felt too fresh to keep going. But then there were the moments of connection, the times when Lauren and I laughed at something silly the kids did or stayed up late talking about our hopes for the future. They were small, fleeting, but they reminded me why I was still here. One night, as we sat on the porch together, Lauren reached for my hand. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, she began, her voice quiet. About how trust isn't something that can be rushed. And I just want you to know that I'm okay with that. However long it takes, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I squeezed her hand, my chest tight with a mix of gratitude and lingering doubt. I know, I said softly. And I'm still here too. It wasn't a declaration of love, and it wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. Months later, as I tucked the kids into bed, my youngest asked a question that caught me off guard. Daddy, are you and Mommy happy now? I froze, staring at her little face. How do you explain the complexities of a marriage to a child? We're trying, sweetheart, I said finally. We're trying really hard. She seemed satisfied with that answer, snuggling into her pillow with a sleepy smile. And as I stood there, watching her drift off, I realized that, trying, wasn't just enough, it was everything. Because in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing to stay, to fight, to believe in the possibility of something better. And for now, that was enough.